Okay. Thanks for tuning in. Has anyone got any comments or questions resulting from the legal update? What was that, Tuesday or last week? I've forgotten now. Any comments on it that you watched or questions that came up? Just go ahead and talk. No. Did everyone get a chance to attend I know they had this wasn't just for our company, this was for all of Broker Risk Management's clients. So they had a limit on the Zoom of 1,000 participants, and I guess they reached that. And then folks who had already registered and were trying to sign on got a message that the maximum capacity had been reached. So they did record it, and it is on their website. And so I will kind of go there first, since we're talking about it. They are going to do another one, but if you did not have a chance to attend the RPA update, the forms update, this is how you go do it. And we'll also get into, it'll also show you where you can go to see that lease rental webinar that they discussed. So let me take you along this little route here. So we got the Broker Risk Management screen there. Can people see that? Nod your head, yes. The screen sharing is working, okay. All right, so to log in, this is brokerriskmanagement.com, and to log in, as we've instructed before, it's BHGWCG, and then the password is Bonita, BONITA, and you log in, and then go here to Client Resources and Manager Training Modules. And here are the recordings that they have posted. So this was the new and revised CAR forms webinar. You can see it's 1 hour and 42 minutes. All you do is punch there and it'll start playing. You can re-watch it or watch it for the first time. Here was the webinar from November 29th. And here is that lease rental training seminar. So if you're doing anything approaching lease rental activities, even if selling a house with a tenant or anything like that, it's good to watch this webinar. And again, you just hit the play and it'll go. All right. Any questions about that? All right, I'll stop sharing that one. So that's how you find that. And let's go over the next things I wanted to cover today. So we were talking about lease rental. So a question that came up this week had to do with agent is representing, I'm not sure if she's representing the seller or the buyer, but the property was tenant occupied. So I'm going to share a screen again and go to, no, not that. Let's try this again. Okay, well, it's wanting me to go to, don't need that screen. That screen. There we are. So we have this is the RPA. And so you all know the RPA comes in a packet. Oops. It just went blank, didn't it? I may have been logged off that too long. So may have to log back on to CAR. So I'm sorry about that. I had it up and then it apparently timed out. Okay. Sorry, I'm just getting back to it. All right. All right, so let me now share the screen. This should come up. All right. And go to full screen. Okay, now we've got, so the scenario is we have a property with its tenant. And we're going to go down to the RPA. These are the forms bundled with the RPA. And here we are in the RPA. So then we start on paragraph 3 of the grid. And down here under possession, 3M, we have 3M3, occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller. So if you're writing the offer and you know it's occupied by a tenant, you would check this and get the TOPA attached. And if you aren't aware that it's occupied by a tenant, and you there's this little proviso here that the seller shall disclose to buyer if it is occupied by tenants or persons other than the seller and attach the TOPA in their counteroffer, if not part of the buyer's offer. So one way or other, if the property has a tenant or someone occupying it other than the owner, you're going to get a TOPA. Now this references paragraph 4A and 7A. So let's just go down and look at those. Excuse me. 4A is just the box there that checks the TOPA. And the 7A has a little verbiage to it about the occupancy. So if buyer intends to occupy a property as primary residence, and unless otherwise agreed, such as in the CRA TOPA form, the unit shall be delivered vacant and so forth and so on. And then it repeats that the seller should disclose to buyer if occupied by tenants or persons other than the seller and attach the TOPA. Okay, all clear on that. So that's how we get to the TOPA. So let's go look at the TOPA. That's a new format. Doesn't let me scroll very easily. There you go. This is the TOPA. Oops. And for this is use when selling tenant occupied 1 to 4 properties, and identifies the agreement that it's referencing and the principles, as the preambles always do. And then there's choices. 1A is tenants to remain in possession. B is the property be delivered vacant. Bill made a point of talking about this in the legal update, if you remember, that the seller, if the property's occupied and the seller makes a good faith attempt, subject to applicable law, to remove the existing tenant by the close of escrow. And they can't, because tenants, squatting or whatever the tenant decides to do, they don't decide not to vacate and the seller can't get them to vacate. Then the buyer's options are either cancel the agreement, and the buyer's sole remedy is the return of deposits, the payment of reasonable out-of-pocket expenses, and or the buyer may elect to proceed with the transaction with the tenant in possession. So it's like the seller is kind of going to get off the hook if that happens. And that's a default if the property is to be delivered vacant. And then further on down here, there's an option under paragraph, let's see, this is under paragraph 2, that the tenant remaining in possession additional terms. And then there's a bunch of things, A, B, C, D, D, yeah. And item DE3, if it's checked, calls for tenant estoppel certificates. So the tenant estoppel certificate, a TEC, it'll be completed by the seller or the seller's agent. And Bill's saying we shouldn't complete these, the seller should do it. So even though the language says the seller agent can do it, we prefer the seller to do it. And delivered to the tenants for tenants to sign and acknowledge. 1, that the tenant's rental or lease agreements are unmodified in full force and effect. Or if they're modified, they would state the modifications. And then 2, that no lesser default exists. That means they're not in default. And the seller is not, the landlord is not in default. And 3, stating the amount of any prepaid rent or security deposits. In the event the seller cannot obtain the signed TEC that within the time specified, the seller shall notify buyer and provide the unsigned one that was provided to the tenant. So again, the seller, if they can't get the seller and the tenant to cooperate, they can just give the buyer a blank one. I mean, not a blank form, but one that was prepared but not signed. And they remain in good accord with the contract. So then now let's look at the TEC and kind of be done with this section. So this is the question that came up actually this week, was about the TEC itself. And this states who the tenant is and the premises. Unlike the other forms, it doesn't kind of state who the landlord is and stuff like that at the top, or it doesn't reference a purchase agreement or anything. It just states who the tenant is and the premises. And then again, the seller is filling this out. So the lease terms. So this item 1 deals with the lease terms, and the copy of the lease is attached to here, and then these recitals: the date of the lease, name of the current landlord, name of the tenant, current base rent, and it's paid through what date, the security deposit, expiration date.
Gary, could I interrupt you for a minute?
Sure.
The way I read this is that the tenants are supposed to be filling this out, even though the other thing says that the seller does, but it reads like it's for the tenants to fill out. Did I totally misconstrue that?
Yes.
Yeah, because it says the undersigned is the tenant of above premises and makes the following representations.
Right. So, but as we covered in the TOPA, it says very clearly that the seller shall prepare this.
Okay.
So, yeah. So what happens here is the seller prepares it, and then they give it to the tenant to acknowledge.
Got it.
And by the tenant acknowledging, they're making the following representation. So in a sense, the seller is putting words in the tenant's mouth about this is the way things are. And if the seller, the tenant disagrees and will say, well, this isn't right. I'm not going to sign that. And
okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll revamp.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the seller is filling this all out in advance. Number of parking spaces, storage spaces, the utilities, who pays what utilities, all lots of check boxes here that the seller's got to do. And then number two, the tenant represents that the original lease remains in full force and effect and constitutes the entire agreement between the tenant and except for the following modifications, amendments, addendums, and preferential right options to. And then the seller would fill in things they know here. And if the buyer got this and had additional things, they would put them in here or ask the seller to put them in. The tenants is the actual occupant. The tenant is not assigned and so forth and so on. All obligations of the landlord under the lease have been fully performed. The landlord is not in default. Tenant is not given any free rent, partial rents, rebates, or any rent concessions of any kind except as follows, and they would be put in there. Tenant is not filed a subject or is not bankrupt. Seller represents the tenant is not in default of any obligations, has not committed any breach, has not received any notice of default. The correct address for the notices of the tenant is the premises, unless otherwise noted. The person signing below represents that he or she is duly authorized by the tenant to execute the statement on the tenant's behalf. So that was a question about when this first came up. What does that mean? So if you can't, the tenant wasn't able to sign it, but the tenants authorized someone to sign it for them. That person was signed as the tenant, and under paragraph 9 there, that person is duly authorized. And that's what we have. And then 10, tenant understands the lender may make a loan based on these representations, and it's a material fact, and the buyer may acquire the premises of the building in which the premise is located. Buyer completes the purchase. Buyer will do so in material reliance on this certificate. So 3 parties sign this. The tenant, they date it and sign it. The landlord or manager, and that's why it has a title here. If it's the management company, they would be by and their title, and then they'd sign it, or the landlord. And then this receipt is by the buyer. Okay, so this is all being done for the buyer. So once this is all signed by the tenant and landlord, it's given to the buyer, and the buyer acknowledges the receipt, and then we're done. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, it's if you don't, we don't use the form every day. We don't do properties with tenants in it very often. So even an experienced agent like Yvonne, comes across this form and has questions. So that's all good. We had the questions. We get them straightened out. All
Thank
right?
you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have questions on any of that? All right, I'm going to move on then to the other part I wanted to cover today, which was the checklists. We've been using TCs and electronic filing in our brokerage, dating back to, I want to say, early 2000s, when I attended an NAR conference in New Orleans, and they have the vendor displays there, these huge rooms full of vendors. And for the first time ever, I saw a vendor with a electronic filing system where all the documents from a transaction file could be put into digital form and stored that way. Excuse me. So we adopted that back in the early 2000s. And we got our first TC, and then we had TCs before that, but they would get together the paper file. And then we had a garage because we were doing, 500 transactions a year at the time. And you had to keep these for 5 years. That's 2,500 files, and you know how big your files are. So it was taking a lot of paper storage. So we converted to that electronic system, and the TCs were really always really very helpful to the agents. And I always had the opinion that I still have the opinion that a salesperson is best out doing what they do best, and that's selling, finding new sellers and buyers for properties, either writing up contracts, writing up listings, or prospecting, and not doing paperwork. Obviously, you want to do the paperwork that an agent needs to do because they're licensed, writing the contracts and writing counter offers and getting, our clients, the documents, knowing that the documents are properly done. But we have the TCs to build our broker file. And the TCs have always used what we call a checklist. So this is the required standard transaction forms for a sales transaction. We have separate one of these for vacant land. We have a separate one for commercial transactions. We have a separate one for mobile home transactions. This is for the standard residential sale. And so these comprise all the documents that we want to have in the broker file at the time of closing. So I just want to go down these quickly. If you have any questions about what they are, obviously, stop and ask me along the way. But the TIS form that's just a transaction information sheet. So when you get your contract together or your listing together, there's a TIS form. Just ask your office admin for a copy, or your TC, and you fill out that form, and it's just names and addresses and phone numbers and things like that. Commission is in there, a commission rate and so forth, and we go off of all that sheet to start the file. And then these next ones are kind of bundled in the RPA, so they all come together when we get our RPA signed. So we got the agency disclosure, fair housing disclosure, possible representation, just addendum, the wire fraud advisory, and the purchase agreement, and the BIA, the buyer's inspection advisory, and the FAA, and I think the CCPA are all of those first bunch of forms there are bundled in the RPA package. Then beyond that, we want an appraisal contingency removal, the inspection contingency removal, the financing contingency removal, the all contingency removal, if they're done separately. We want pre-approval letters, proof of funds, documentation. All this is called for in the RPA. The escrow open order sheet, which you'll get from the title company when you open the escrow at the title company. Escrow acknowledgement, page 16. That's page 16 of the RPA. If the escrow company signs that and gives it back to us. The deposit receipt for the deposit into escrow. And the closing statement that we would get from escrow at the time of closing. And qualified substitute, this would have to do with that, what is it called? The tax affidavit that the seller is not liable for taxes, and this title company helps us get that qualified substitute document. Okay, any questions? Those are all what we call sales documentation. And then there's disclosure documentation. So we want the AVID, both the listing and the buyer's AVID, fully acknowledged by the buyer and seller. We have a BHG advisor to buyer regarding online property information. The BHG FERPTA notice. The BIE, the buyer's inspection election form. That's that lovely one with 50 items listed on there. The buyer's inspection waiver, if they're waiving any. The county disclosure, that would be the specific county disclosure for the county you're in. So Napa has one, Sonoma has one, Mendocino has one, Lake County has one, Humboldt has one. They all have different county disclosures. I'll get you in a second, Amy. The exempt seller disclosure, only if it's a TDS exempt. So if we have an exempt, we have a trust or a probate sale or something like that, and the foreclosure, the seller is exempt, we get the exempt seller disclosure. Let me stop there. And you got a question, Amy?
Yes, the advisory regarding online property information, is that new? I've never seen that or been requested to provide that.
I don't believe it's new, but our TCs should be gathering at Keeley. Are you still on the line?
Yes, I am. However, I only take care of files for Humboldt County, but yes, that's as long as far back as I can remember, that has been a required document.
So we may be getting it, Amy, and you actually may not even be aware of it. Sometimes the TCs are getting documents and to complete our file, and maybe you just weren't aware of it. But if you want a copy of it and see what the heck it is, just ask your TC to send you a copy, and ask them if they're getting it.
Yeah, I'll talk to Katie. I always have her CC me on everything that goes out, and that certainly isn't something I recall.
Okay.
Ever seen.
Check with Katie. I will attach this list to the recording when the recording goes out, so you can have a copy of it in your file if you want. Okay, then we have the earthquake hazard report, the LPD, lead paint, marketing conditions advisory. We got the Humboldt County. Humboldt has about 4 different separate disclosures that Keeley pointed out to me. So if you're up there, you know what they are. Property detail. I don't know if that's a printout of the MLS, probably. Residential environmental hazards, seller buyer statewide advisory, square footage advisory, SBQ, TDS, verification of property. That's the walkthrough. Water heater, water conserving, and wildfire advisory. So a lot of documents. You all know this. But these all go in the file. And then the home inspection advisory and the buyer acknowledgement, if there is one, the NHD report with all parties acknowledging, pest inspection report if there is one, and the buyer acknowledging, and the preliminary title report, including exceptions and hyperlinks, with the buyer's acknowledgement. And that's what we call a complete file. So you can see there's a lot that the TCs do back there to get that together for us. And if we ever have, knock on wood, we don't, DRE audit of our systems. This is what we tell them we do. And they would pull files. They typically pull files from our system, SkySlope now, and they would look at them and audit them and see if we have all these things. Okay, we got a question here. Let's see.
Square foot advisory.
Right, that's in there. Mhm.
Yeah, but can we use cars as opposed to Better Homes and Gardens? Car has a square foot advisory, so we're kind of duplicating that document.
Hey, Amy, I'm gonna step in. It's Keely. That the Wine Country Group square footage advisory is no longer used. It is the CAR form now that we are using. So if you have that, yeah, in your library, just go ahead and delete that out.
Perfect.
Okay. Shannon's asked, who's the TC for Sonoma? When you submit your all the original documents go to Katie. Katie Medina's our head TC, and then Katie will assign them based on the workload that each has and who's able to handle it. And then she does try to see that you have a steady, if you will, relationship with your TC. So she'll try to get you back to the same TC all the time. Yeah, that we answered about the square footage advisory, Curtis. We're just using the CAR one now. Joe says Chris Brown's a TC in Sonoma. He does a great job, and thank you, Joe. But some of our agents also work with Katie, and some work with Tish Thames, who used to be an agent for us. He does a great job as a TC. She's, even though she's in let's see, where is she? New Mexico, I think she's living now, but she does it remotely. Okay, I think that cleared up the question box. Okay, well, that's all I have for today. Does anyone have additional questions? I'm gonna get out early. Oh, Heather's not around today because she is in a Norbar board meeting, I think. So she is on the board at Norbar. Okay. All right, well, we'll send this out around with the attachment there, and then watch those videos or those webinars if you didn't get to attend, or if you want to watch the rental one, that's all good. And they're going to do a second presentation on the RPA forms, Bill and Shannon, and we'll certainly let you know as soon as we hear that date and time. Okay. All right. Back to work.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.